Yeah, and we're live. So, hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we question everything to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So, today we're taking a critical look at policing, the tactics and methods, and the need for police reforms, and whether or not such reforms work, the merits and the demerits of the defund the police movement, and so much more. So my guest today is William Fullwood, who is a faculty instructor at Wake Technical Community College. He's the host of the Contraband Wagon Show, which aims at changing the conversation on race. He describes himself as a truth seeker. So William, welcome to Critical African Thinkers. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Charles. Appreciate being here, brother.
Yeah, so I came across one of your tweets on Twitter, right? Basically, that's where we had this, this meeting talking about policing, and you just said if anyone wants to talk about policing, right, that they should reach out. And I was like, okay, so this is an opportunity because I know that recently I wrote an article on my Substack on about policing, right? That one was about resisting arrest should not be a death sentence. And I think the other one, the latest one, what was the latest one about? Can't really think about what I can't remember the name of the latest article, but it was still about policing. So I've kind of been interested about how policing works in America and maybe in other parts of the world. So I wanted to bring you in so we can share our thoughts. But before we go into that, so just introduce yourself, give us more in depth about yourself, what you do, especially as it regards these kinds of conversations. So,
Sure. So, as you said, I am the creator of the Contraband Wagon, which is basically my Twitch channel. I have a YouTube channel, and I'm very active on Twitter. You can find me by searching the Contraband Wagon on YouTube, or I also have a website, www.thecontrabandwagon.com. You can submit an application there. Anyone's welcome to have a 2-hour live conversation with me about race, and that's what I do. Is I create race conversations. So, of course, there's a strong relationship between race and policing in the United States of America. So it has come up a lot. I actually have hosted several panel discussions as well, the intersection of race and different contexts. So one of them was the intersection of race and law enforcement, where we actually talked to two Black police captains and a Black police lieutenant to talk about their perspective about, that intersection. Very interesting and novel stuff that came out of that discussion. And it's just something that those kinds of conversations and insider information that you can't really get from any other sources is something that I value greatly because it's how you get at the truth. And so it doesn't seem like a lot of people in mainstream media have caught on to that reality. However, I've known about it for some time. So I've been investigating these problems, and that's really one of them that I've been investigating is policing. When I was teaching high school in Harlem in New York City, at the beginning of my teaching career, about year 4, I started noticing a lot of my Black students being arrested. And so that kind of got me interested in the school to prison pipeline. And that kind of turned me into a law student. And I was one of the founding members of the Youth Advocacy Law Association at my law school. And one of the things that we did was a Raise the Age initiative. New York and North Carolina, the two only states that I've ever lived permanently, are the only states that had a adult criminal culpability at age 16 still. Every other state was 18. And so, I was working with the judge who was running the movement in New York to try to change things. And both states have changed since then. So that's the kind of thing that I was doing. That's the kind of thing that I was interested in. And then kind of when I started having these conversations on race on my live stream, that's when I started getting more interest in policing because I started seeing just a lot of media being put out about policing, and I learned things here and there about it, but I didn't know too much. And there was a lot of throwing around of statistics, and obviously as a mathematics person, I'm a mathematics teacher, as you said. So I was interested in how people use statistics, because as somebody who teaches math all the time, I understand that most people don't know anything about math or know very little about it. So when I see people using math to try to justify things, I'm always very skeptical, because I've just found way too many mathematical errors in what people are doing with numbers. And this was no different. I ended up talking to a former Phoenix police officer, Phoenix, Arizona police officer, who, changed and became a PhD student investigating police killing statistics. And he was working with a team. So we talked a lot about those statistics and what he was finding. I shared my research that I found with him. And, the conclusion is, and this is something that's written on every official investigation into collecting police statistics, regardless of whatever methods are being used, there's always an acknowledgement that these statistics can't be relied on for anything, because there's too many problems with the collection of them that have not been solved. So there's always that acknowledgement, yet people are using them as if they're like, sent down from heaven or something. So it's extremely frustrating. But running away from reality or obscuring reality is something that this country has always done. And so they're very good at it. So that's all that's happening.
That's quite interesting. So a follow-up question from what you just said. What are some of those problems with collecting of the statistics that you've observed, these racial statistics as regards to policing? What are some of those problems that you've observed?
Sure. So let me see. One of them is that most of the statistics that people are relying on are voluntarily offered by law enforcement. Okay, so the data is just voluntarily offered up, but it's not offered up from the vast majority of law enforcement agencies across the nation. So it's very incomplete. It's not even half complete. So, for people to say that it represents what's happening around the country, when we know, based on evaluation of local police departments around the country, that they operate differently, they have different resources, they have different, problems in the communities that they're dealing with. So, they have different environments in which they live and work. So, and politics are different in different locations as well, which, affects all of those things. So it's just very, very difficult to make broad statements about policing and law enforcement in general across the country. And most of the broad statements that you can make, though, are like kind of negative. So it makes the conversation a little bit difficult to have. But just to give you more about the statistics and why they're problematic. So in all of these police brutality cases, and I'm talking 100% of them, where Black people are maimed or shot and unarmed, or killed or just hurt, or beat up or strangled or taken into custody only to die 2 or 3 days later. A lot of people just have in their mind that when we're talking about police killing people, we're talking about a shootout or something. But the truth of the matter is, police kill people in a lot of ways. I've seen them light people on fire. They just froze a man to death. Dogs have killed them. All kinds of things happen. And how those situations are cataloged by the police are oftentimes not accurate. In every single one of these cases, in fact, 100% of them, the police reporting does not correspond with what the video and other material evidence shows. So it's common practice for law enforcement to lie on their reports. Otherwise, we wouldn't reach that 100% mark. If you want to talk about statistics and their use, I think that's a pretty good measure there. Yet we're pretending like the voluntary submission of data by law enforcement, by a small percentage of law enforcement, should represent the reality of policing in America. I mean, it's illogical. So,
Mm. So you said that different police departments across the country, they have their own standards, they have their own funding, they have their own peculiar issues. You've lived in two states, right? So can you pick one
Well,
of those states?
three, I guess, but yeah.
Three, okay. Can you pick one of the states that you've lived the longest in and just examine or x-ray the policing in that state, what the merits are and the demerits, and what the issues are that are peculiar or unique to the police department in the city that you've lived in for the longest?
Hmm. Okay. So that would be New York, really. I mean, I've lived in North Carolina longer, but like I've been an adult in New York longer. So I feel like I should kind of, well, I could deal with both. Let's start with New York. I actually lived in New York City for 12 years. Um, and, maybe the best way of going about this is telling you about my interactions with law enforcement. I had 4 interactions with law enforcement during my 12 years in New York City, despite my best efforts. So the first time I was celebrating a birthday of a friend. I was with my friend, the friend's whose birthday it was, and his brother, the 4 of us. And we were walking from one bar to another in Midtown Manhattan. And we saw this guy kind of staring at us. We were like talking and laughing, walking down the street. And then I don't know, we all felt a chill or something, or somebody saw him. I can't remember. But he was standing at the top of a stairwell behind a gate, just staring at us. So it was very weird. We ended up getting freaked out, and we were like, let's get to this bar. However, my friend was a girl wearing heels, and so she did not run very well as the rest of us. And he ended up stopping her. So, I saw what
Wait,
happened.
you ran?
Oh yeah.
Why?
Well, this I can't explain, but like, except for that he was menacing. Like, he was standing at the top of a stairwell, staring at us, like just clearly looking at us like he was going to prey on us, like looking like a predator looking at his prey. We all could notice that. Have you never experienced that?
Okay, I'm still trying to understand. I'm still trying to understand how one man could be so threatening to a group of people that you had to run.
Well, he was
Was he
enormous,
in police
first of
uniform?
all. No, he was not in a police uniform. He was in plain clothes. He was an enormous guy. Okay, like John
Mm.
Coffey in The Green Mile, enormous.
Okay, so you did
Staring
not
at.
know he was a police officer
That's
at
correct.
that
Yeah,
point in
that's
time.
part of the
Okay,
story.
okay, okay. So that makes
So,
sense.
so anyway, he stops my friend. I'm looking from the corner, like looking and watching to see what happens.
Wait. What? You left your friend who was
We
in
were
the
all
hills?
running, and then I turned
You
and I
left your
saw that
female
she was
friend?
not behind me. That's what happened. The
Okay.
other 2 were ahead of me. I was the only one who left back. And so I see my friend being stopped. I'm like, she's a white girl. She's okay. She can probably manage, whatever situation happens. But I was just checking. Um,
Really? Wait.
no,
She
I'm
being
just
a
kidding.
white girl. If this guy was a predator, right? If this guy was
No, it's a
someone
joke.
sinister.
It was just a joke, Charles.
Okay, okay, okay,
100% a
okay,
joke.
okay.
Okay. Um, anyway, that's why I was looking around the corner, because I was not going to leave her, right? I was going to make sure that whatever went down. I couldn't tell what was going down. I don't know why he came after us. All of it was weird. It was weird from the very beginning. Anyway, so I saw him just kind of talking to her. And that's when I kind of thought maybe he might be a police officer, because they were just kind of talking or whatever. So I come closer, I start hearing what he's saying. And he is declaring that he's a police officer, this and that. He won't show his identification. He won't give us any identification. Eventually, all of us are out there. The other 2 come back as well. They're like, what's going on? We're trying to figure this out. He tries to get everybody's ID, despite me being a law student and the only person who actually knows the law, telling them not to give up their IDs. Everyone did. And so, I just complied as well, just to make things move forward. I gave him my passport, which I was using as my ID at that time because my license was expired. And he was taking us aside one by one and just interrogating us for about 20 minutes. And I was not happy about it, and I was not quiet about that. Eventually he gets to me. he has me with my back against the wall, like talking to me, standing in front of me, telling me that he's part of a narcotics task force who are looking around for people who are, selling drugs or this and that. And he's like telling me if I have drugs that I need to dump it out of my bag or this and that, trying to get me to incriminate myself. I just eventually, I let him go on for a while, for some time. He was talking about, oh, we've got a van around the corner. We can call him around. I'm like, call him. I'm like, that's fine. Please call someone, in fact, because, at this point, this lone ranger who would not show us our identification, I thought maybe he was impersonating an officer, So ultimately, I finally was like, let me just try to push back a little bit and see what happens. Well, here's what happened. I told him, listen, man, I'm a law student. I know what my rights are. You can't really be detaining us for this long and for no reason, and that made him infuriated. He grabbed my throat. He spun me around, threw me against the wall, kicked my leg open, started searching me. And I'm sorry, first he pulled out a gun. And I was just like in shock because I didn't even notice he had a gun actually. And he saw my shock. He put it away. Then he grabbed me by the throat and threw me against the wall and started searching me. And he was whispering in my ear and he was saying, you should have just done what I told you to do, like telling, total power trip mode. And he was like, you think you're something, giving me your passport, this and that. Because he wrote down my friends' addresses. He wrote down their like information from their licenses in a pad. So I told him, my license is expired. I have my expired license on it. I was like, here, you can see, and he looked at it and he gave it. And he was just like, basically telling me that I should just do whatever he said. And I was like, okay, yeah, definitely. I was just placating him at that point so he would leave us. And he did eventually after I kind of like, showed some deference to him or whatever. So anyway, during that whole exchange, we actually called internal affairs in New York City and we're on the phone with them. And when he pulled out the gun and we were telling the person internal affairs that this guy pulled a gun on us, they basically said that we were making that up, like on the phone while it was happening, which was hilarious. Anyways, after it all happened, everybody was traumatized by what happened. And we ended up calling the police ourselves. More police officers came. We described what happened. They were like, there's no way that guy's a police officer. Of course, it turned out he was a police officer working part-time at a school. He was at the school for some reason at 1:15 a.m. Never figured out why. But he was, that's who it was. Found that out a little bit later, a week later, in fact, when his superior officer called and said, well, he's an officer, so there's no problem. That's what he said. And we had actually gone to the police station that night. We all filled out a report of impersonating an officer because the officers who we told our story to were like, there's no way this guy could be an officer. A year and a half later, all of us get a phone call from, I guess, somebody new in the department asking us if we would testify against this guy to remove him from the force. A year and a half later. I also saw him 6 months later rip somebody off a subway train. So, I think it's demonstrative of how policing operates in American society in a lot of ways. One, that like this guy was obviously out of control. Anyone would be able to notice that this guy's behavior was just extreme. I also I left out part of the story. I actually went to the independent review board, civilian complaint review board that exists in New York City to try to have a mediation with this guy. It was like mediation or start an investigation. But I was like actually scared of this guy because he was obviously to me somebody who would kill me in a second. So I did do a mediation with this guy, and literally he threatened me during the mediation session. And the mediator, I'm like looking at her, I'm like, did you just, and she's just like pretending like nothing happened. And then at the end of the session, they're like, oh, and the guy lied through his teeth about everything that happened. So like she was like, oh, do you think that this settled things? I'm like, I don't know what this was for, like, I'm not really sure why this happened, So I feel like none of the systems that are set up to have any kind of accountability work. I think that's one of the biggest problems, and that is exemplified in all kinds of different situations. And I think that's something that is nationwide, but it manifests in different ways depending upon your location. Um, and that's just that was one experience. My first experience actually was when I first moved to New York City. The day I moved there, I stayed with my friend in Queens, and I was living in Manhattan. And the next day, the second day I was there, I went back to the apartment I was going to be living in as a new New York City teaching fellow. And I was the first person to arrive out of 4 who were going to stay in this place. And I was burglarized the first night I was there. So I go there and like all my stuff has been stolen. And I spent all my money getting to New York. So like I had no money and no stuff. And that's how I started in New York City. So I called the police. They come over and they basically like just like look around. They're looking around and then they're about to leave. And I'm like, should I fill out like a report? Like, are you going to like do anything? You know? I mean, I'm like, are you going to check for fingerprints? We know where they came in. Like, I mean, are you like, I'm the one suggesting they do some of these things. And so they're like, oh yeah. We should definitely do that, you know? And then they start, you know, fingerprinting the windowsill and stuff and this and that and filling out a report. So then they leave and I see like a partially filled out report on the ground. Like they crumpled it up and they threw it on the ground. And that was my first experience with them. Another experience I had, I was living in Brooklyn this time, and I was living with a roommate and his girlfriend, and they were fighting, first verbally, then physically. Like we're talking like broken glass is being swung. All right. So I call the police, and first question they ask, where are you located? I give them my address. Second question they ask, what race are the people? Second question. So that struck me, and I was just like, why? You know, like I'm like, why? You know, it's not like they asked me to describe them. They were like, what race are they? And then when I asked why, because I had the wherewithal to ask that in that moment, he was like, well, we just want to know what we're dealing with. That's what he said. We just want to know what we're dealing with. That was his answer.
The implication being that if it was a certain race, they would have to deal with them in a different manner, right? Or the
I mean,
implication
I don't
being
think that there's any other implication. Yeah, I think that's exactly what he was saying. Yeah, is that if he heard one thing, he would think about the situation differently. If he hears another thing, he'll think about it differently. Turns out the people were a white man and a Korean woman, but like, I'm like, did that help you? You know, like, but yeah. So they responded like 7 hours later or something. So, you know,
7 hours later.
yeah. My roommates, they took that fight into the street. They're like beating each other in the middle of the street, screaming, like in the middle of the night. I had to teach class the next morning. It wasn't fun. I did call them back after 2 hours, like, because this fight was ongoing. And they were like, oh, yeah, we'll get there, you know, or whatever. So they ended up showing up in the morning at some point when I was leaving for work. Nobody even talked to me. So, yeah. Some other experiences recent in North Carolina, where I live currently. A friend of mine was followed to her dentist appointment. So a white woman was followed by this guy to her dentist appointment, and he chased her almost into the dentist's office. Her dentist was able to lock the door and, you know, shelter her in the bathroom in the back. And this guy's banging on the window because of what he perceived to be I guess a road rage incident, you could say. And they called the police. Now, my friend's doctor is a Black woman. And, you know, when she was trying to explain to the officer who responded what happened, he told her to shut her mouth, you know, and he called my friend an N-word lover, you know, and they let the guy go without any punishment. Guy was a white man. He was a military veteran. he wrote down my friend's license plate number, you know, and they just let him go. So, I think there's this image of protect and serve that if you actually encounter law enforcement, and this happens all the time, I have friends who encounter law enforcement for the first time, or they see something in action for the first time and they're like, why did this happen? And, they're confused because they've been sold an image of protect and serve, and it's not what they experience in real life. And, I get these calls all the time, people being like, can you believe this happened? And I'm like, yes, I can believe it because I actually know how this operates and what's going on out there. Anyway, I think I've spoken for long enough, so I'll let you.
Wow, that was quite a role. So many things, so many things was just going through my head as you were saying all those things. So in my country, there's this statement that the police is your friend, and many people disagree with that sentiment because of the ugly experiences that they've had with the police, right? And from what you're just saying, it's just playing in my mind that is this the nature of police around the world? Why do they have to be that terrible, right? Why do they have to act in that manner? At times, from the videos that you see of police interactions, you see them escalating a situation that's normally a benign situation. They just escalate it from 0 to 10, and someone ends up losing their lives. Or at times, they give out conflicting commands, and the person doesn't know what to do. The person ends up losing their lives. So I've got to ask, what is it about the police that attracts this kind of behavior? Why are the police on such an ego trip, right? Before we even get to the race stuff, let's deal with policing in general, right? Why are they in so much of an ego trip? Why is there something in the nature of police that attracts a certain type of individual?
That's a great question. I think the consensus in the law enforcement community and beyond is yes. They are attracting people. I actually just had a conversation with a woman who was raised by a Miami police officer, and she was saying this exact thing, basically that it's people who felt bullied in their life who then are given a gun and a badge and authority, so they're able to kind of act out and become the bully, and like able to kind of release some of that trauma in an unhealthy way, and it's encouraged. And the reason why it's encouraged is because the training that a lot of these officers receive is to prioritize protecting their life through violence, through the use of violence. That's how they're taught. That your life, you need to protect it. You have the authority to protect it, right? So they're told that they have the legal authority to protect it, which plays out in reality, right? They have all these legal protections, regardless of what they do. So much so in the United States that they can be convicted of a crime, even murder, and still rehired by a police department in another location. And that has happened multiple times. So, it's, sorry, your question. Sorry, I totally lost your question. What was it?
So my question was, why is the police force attracting a certain type of individual that's on an ego trip?
Yeah, because it's people who will adopt that ideology, who will like stand by the thin blue line, or whatever, who will, they're not going to see injustice and fight back against it. And they're going to be good agents of the state. That's what officers are. You got to remember that. That's what they are. They're people who are given orders by the state, and then they have to execute those orders, like soldiers in a way, right? Like if you're a soldier, if you're a good soldier, then you follow orders, right? You can't be a good soldier without following orders. It's very similar situation in policing. If you're not following, whatever, if the standard is to lie on police reports to cover yourself, if the standard is to, beat on people to make them submit if you don't like them, or if they're giving you an attitude, then you're going to go along with that standard if you're one of these people who were kind of bullied and then are put in a position of authority, because you want to keep that. You don't want to return to that bullied stage, right? Which some people do. Mostly the good officers are the ones who do see corruption and do see injustice and do call it out. those people get retaliated against, even if they're vindicated. Like it's not like they escape retaliation because someone's held accountable. They get their careers are typically over, and if they're not over, then they're basically forced to resign because their lives are made miserable. And it's not like that only happens in policing; it happens in all kinds of jobs, right? But in policing, your life is on the line, your family's safety is on the line, because a lot of these officers can get away with criminal behavior as well under color of law, because again, there's very little accountability for cops who commit crimes. So it's just they want people who they can easily control, and they're not really looking at a profile for a certain type of cop who may exhibit more empathy or humanity towards the communities that they're supposed to be serving. However, there have been locations that have done that. I can't remember exactly which city this is in, but there is a specific police department in a specific city. I'll have to look it up, but they did change their hiring practices. They noticed what you were just asking about, that they were getting a certain kind of profile of a certain kind of person. And so they deliberately changed their hiring practices to get a different kind of person with a different kind of personality into some of these jobs. And what they found was within 1 year, every single one of the complaints that they were receiving were from officers who were hired under the previous plan, and exactly 0 of the complaints they got from people who they hired under the new plan. So to me, that was a drastic show that there is a problem, that it does have a solution. But the question is, how do these solutions come to bear? You see this again in many contexts, not just policing, that solutions exist, but they don't become popularized. And to me, when that happens, that's a betrayal of the priorities and policies of the location that you're talking about. In this case, the US and, its localities.
So let's talk about police reforms, right? You just gave an example of them changing their hiring practices and the impact it had on the quality or the kinds of complaints that they'd be having. So what types of police reforms do you think are necessary at this point in time? What types have worked? What types, should be pushed for legislatively to get better policing?
Yeah. So, I definitely think exactly what I just said, right? Like changing the hiring practices to reflect that location's change. And it was a slight change. It wasn't something that would take a lot of work or money or time. And we know that it works. Like it worked so well. So we don't have to wonder about the results. A lot of the reforms that were within the George Floyd Act, I want to make sure we're clear that most of law enforcement agrees with those reforms, that are in the legislation. We need to understand that. Like, I feel like a lot of people don't get that. They think that it's law enforcement on one side and then like BLM on the other or something like that. But like actually a lot of law enforcement officers agree that there needs to be significant reform in policing. Like for instance, the Fraternal Order of the Police, which is the largest law enforcement organization in the nation, they signed off on the reforms in the George Floyd Act as saying they want them. Yet none of, like exactly 0 of them were passed. So when a situation like that is happening, you have to realize that there are special interests using and exerting their power over what the people want in order to maintain this system. That's what's occurring. I just want to put that out there because you need to frame it that way if you're to understand what's going on. So back to your question, you were asking me specifically what reforms. So other reforms are, it should be disqualifying if you commit criminal acts under color of law. You should not be able to be hired as a police officer, but it's quite frequent. It's shockingly frequent. If police officers lie on an official report, they need to be charged. It's against the law. There's already criminal statutes on the books, but they are never charged, quite literally never. There's quite a large number of statutes on the books that are never enforced. that are being violated all the time. Most of them are statutes meant to protect citizens' rights. And so all, like, someone in my position can see all that, right? I can literally watch it play out as someone who went to a million arraignments, seen it happen live, represented people in criminal court, learned about the system, talk to judges, like talk to people who are incarcerated, talk to people who were corrections officers and captains and lieutenants and all this stuff, right? That is my perspective based on, all of that, is that most officers want some of these reforms, changing who they have to work with, giving whistleblowers more protection, right? People who call out the bad cops in their midst. I mean, they end up losing everything, a lot of them, It's another way you can tell that there's a lot of corruption in policing, because police officers who are charged with a crime, typically they get to keep their pensions. They get to keep their jobs. They get paid even while they're on leave. I think it was Colin Kaepernick who said, officers are getting paid vacations for killing people. Like, that's what's happening. And he's right. And it continues to happen. And even if they're convicted, sometimes they're allowed to retire first, so they still get their pensions, even though they just got convicted of murder. Like, it's a decision that's being made. People have to ask themselves, if those kinds of decisions are being made, it has to be made by some of the top leaders. And if it's the case that the chief of police of many police departments continue to be implicated in crimes, maybe there's an issue, So I don't know what all the reforms, like, I think in terms of like shifting funds, it's obvious that needs to happen. Even police officers want it to happen. They want funds diverted into dealing with mental health issues. A lot of people who get in prison and who encounter police have mental health issues. But instead of putting funding into those issues, we continue to increase police budgets, and they use that money to buy more weapons of destruction and to use them on the public. And that's what happens. It can't stop until we stop doing that, right? We're literally funding our own oppression here, And so that's what's happening. If we want to change it, we have to do reforms. Everyone wants them. So we have to face the power that's stopping it, And I guess identifying that power and identifying a strategy that will work is step one.
So before we go into defund the police, before we just look at defund the police and the merits of that or demerits, let me just follow up with an issue that you raised, that many of the police officers actually want these reforms, right? They want these reforms to happen, but somehow it never gets to pass because there are higher ups who do not want this thing to happen. And there are probably politicians who have a stake. So my question is, what is the upside to the higher authority maintaining the status quo? What exactly do they get from having a police force that is that militarized, or a police force that terrorizes the populace? What's going on there?
We have a prison industrial complex. Okay, we have a economic system that is dependent on putting people in prison. That's why. And the people who benefit are politicians and people who are involved in the system of incarceration. Like, they are quite literally benefiting from militarizing the police, because the more people we put into these facilities, there's all kinds of private prisons now around our country. And, the more people they put in, the more money they get. Like, that's how it works. It's that simple. They are literally lining their pockets with human beings still. Okay. That's how this country started, and it's just still going on, just in a legal way. Okay. So that's what's going on here.
This is just American capitalism in play.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, dehumanization and American capitalism have gone hand in hand since American slavery. And unfortunately, a lot of people were taught that somehow there's no carryover from that generation to today, which is why we're having all these battles with, arguing about race and the 1619 Project and how we're going to define our country's narrative and history and this and that. But, aside from arguing about narratives, you can't, I don't personally deny reality. Okay. I search for reality. I search for truth. And so I can't pretend that I don't know for sure that the level of dehumanization that's been in the history of this country is being reflected in 2023 here through these private prisons, through forcing these people to work for nothing, for pennies on the dollar, to make people rich, right? Think about it. If I have a product that I have prisoners who are working for almost nothing creating, right, or aiding in the creation of, and I'm selling it, making a fortune, I am incentivized to make sure that I have those people to do that work. I have no incentive to make sure those people are not there, imprisoned, incarcerated, doing the work. And, if I need to give someone else that incentive, I probably have the money to do so, right? If I need to make sure that someone gets into a fight while they're incarcerated so that they can be locked up for longer, somebody with the means can very easily do that. And it may sound conspiracy theory-ish, but there's all kinds of blackmail and just the worst aspects of humanity that get activated when people are incarcerated and someone has control over their body and freedom. So yeah, it's maintaining that system so that people can accumulate wealth without having to do anything except for make sure that people stay imprisoned. And you see it also at the level of street policing. Like a lot of police will go out looking for people to arrest because they get overtime. If they make an arrest at a certain time, then they have to go through the processing and all this stuff. It takes more time and they get paid for that. I mean, I've heard cops directly tell me that they're doing that or that other people they know are doing it. So yeah, that's also a thing.
Seeing that this is a very, very important aspect of American society, I think America has the largest prison population in the world, right? Why is this not a big political issue? I mean, why doesn't it come up during the election cycle, during presidential elections, during state elections? Why isn't police reform? Why isn't reform of the criminal justice system? Why is there no concerted effort against a for-profit prison system, because we know very well what happens when there's a profit motive behind certain things, right? And I don't think that something like policing should be run by run in a profit model where it's basically like a business, because you're going to want to create products.
But
And
we're running everything like a business here, Charles. That's like education has been slowly being run more and more like a business over time. We're at the pinnacle of ever that it's ever been at in terms of being thought of as a business by the people who are in charge of organizing our education system. I know that because I'm in it, and I've been watching this descent into whatever it is we're doing at this point. Where we're at now. So yeah, that is a huge problem. And yes, you're right. We do know. The problem is not ignorance. Okay. The problem is not ignorance. The problem is political will. The problem is political will. We do not have the political will as a country to fight against this tyranny. That is what the scenario is.
not even with your votes, you don't have the political will even with your votes to fight something like
That's
this. you
correct.
you you can't support a candidate who you say, you know what, this is what we want, right? And if you're ready to give us this, then we are ready to vote for you.
Yeah, but I
I
mean,
mean,
again, Charles, in order to be a successful politician, right, you have to get elected. In order to get elected, you have to beat your opponents. And ultimately, the interests that want to keep private prisons going have a lot of money. They will use that money to make sure that no one gets elected to an office who is able to interfere with the money stream that they've created. So ultimately, if your question is like, is there power to do that? Like, probably, like, it could be gathered, but it's not happening because ultimately, the people who get mostly impact by police corruption and corruption in the criminal justice system are people of low socioeconomic status. And they're not able to bring together a power that's strong enough, that has enough staying power to make an impact. Once in a
Right.
while you'll see somebody that does have the means, right? And you'll see that they'll get results in a singular situation, right? But it never results in policy change because there's not enough, right? I mean, think about Uvalde. Are you familiar with the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, here in the States? Are you familiar with that?
What?
The school shooting we had in Uvalde, Texas.
Yeah,
Where
yeah, yeah. I was
yeah.
reading some of the comments. I think there was a question that came from Oge.
Oh,
Yes,
go ahead.
very familiar with. I'm very familiar with that school shooting and how the police officers basically took their time as kids were being slaughtered in their classrooms. And yeah, I'm familiar with it. So in that sense, is that a was it like a failure of the police tactics itself? Was it required that they wait that long to get more tactical gear before they went in, or that was just incompetence by the officers present at that point in time?
No, they did not follow police policy. Does that make any sense, right? Like the police policy would be to wait an hour while you're all there, standing outside while people are being killed inside. No, that's not police policy. So that's not the training they received. So yeah, I
Okay.
mean, who can explain exactly why that happened? I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't think they know the answer. I've seen a
Mm.
cop shoot someone, and then when the guy asked why you shot me, he was like, "I don't know." Like, I mean, there's things that are happening, right? Like, people are definitely being trained to do that, right? Like, I mean, a guy wanted to rush in there and save his like wife, one of the officers, and he was told no, right? And like, so like they were just letting people die. Obviously, that can't be police policy. And so I don't know, man. All I can say is that there is a clear dehumanization streak in policing. Okay, the way they even talk about people is not like they're human beings. So I think that is being taught. I think that it's even more prevalent within prisons. That's something that needs to be talked about more. People act like it's once someone's in prison, they belong there, and that's not even remotely the case. So I just think, in terms of fixing them, most people don't learn about these problems until it happens to them or someone they love. That's what I was saying earlier, right? Like, it's that I get these calls, people like being, and then the police officer did this to me, and then I don't know why this happened, and then he arrested my cousin, and I don't like. I'm like, yeah, like, I mean, they're not there to help you, like. I can't tell you how many videos I've seen of like police arriving and making everything worse, and everyone agrees, no matter which side they're on, that they made everything worse. So it's just, ultimately people have to care, I guess, and believe that they can do something to change it. I don't think that we have that in general in our country. I don't think that we have within our individual citizenry a belief that we can do anything about these large scale problems, which is not reality. But if people believe that, it becomes reality. So I think that's what we're dealing with here.
Mm. So, before I open the stream for other people to call in, the final question I have for you would be: what are your thoughts on the defund the police movement? Right. So, just give me what you think. Is it a good movement, or some people are claiming that it's made policing worse in the sense that crime has been on the uptick, and some of it is traced to the fact that the police have been defunded; they don't have enough funds to do certain things. So, what are your thoughts on the defund the police movement, and what are your thoughts, if any, on the impact that movement has had in policing and crime in America?
Well, I don't know who's saying that police departments are being defunded and not being able to do what they need to do, because it's not true. Like, period. I don't know what else to say about that. Like, it's not true. In fact, their budgets are increasing. After Breonna Taylor was killed, the Louisville Police Department's budget was increased by almost $800,000. And they were under investigation by the Department of Justice. And they just concluded their investigation, and they found rampant systemic racism within the police department, including calling Black people monkeys regularly, including, using excessive force all the time, unjustly, violation of people's rights. They found all kinds of things. So despite all that, guess what? Their budget will increase again. I would put my life on it. So there is a disconnect between what's happening in reality and then, there's that whole idea of meritocracy here, right? Like that if you do the right thing, then you get rewarded or whatever. Well, I think this is showing that it's quite the opposite. They're not doing the right thing, and they're still getting more and more money into their budgets. And so all people are talking about when they say defund the police is stop doing that. Stop doing that, right? If you want to give more money, then divert some of those funds to dealing with the underlying issues that are causing all of these people to have interactions with the police, or to enact some of the reforms that the large majority of the citizenry and police officers want. But, again, that's a political decision. It's made by individual politicians. And until we get people in those positions who are willing to fight for justice, who are willing to make the decisions and use their power in a way that, reduces the violence in the country and the violation of people's rights that happens constantly, then it's going to continue.
All right, Steve, welcome to the conversation. So jump right
What's up,
in.
Will?
I'm good.
What's up, Steve? What's up, brother?
I'm doing all right, man. Messed up my ankle, so if I'm like winching in pain, that's why. No, I think
Sorry about that.
yeah, it's all good. I'm just getting old. So I pretty much agree with Will on almost bloody everything there, and I've been a pretty vocal opponent of. I've been an advocate of changing police procedures, abolishing qualified immunity, dealing with police officers appropriately when they break the law themselves. So, like, nothing that Will has said has been markedly untrue. Like, it's all very consistent with reality. I'll go a step further than that and say, I think the way that conservatives specifically look at policing in the United States is a little bit weird and funky. Because you'll see a truck driving around, with a Dresden flag on it, and it says "Don't tread on me," and right next to that is a cop, a cop flag, and it's just like those two things do not go together, not at all. And so it's really weird to see people supporting police or law enforcement so just blanketed, because I know a lot of cops. I have several friends who are police officers, and even they are like, "This is jack." I know I've had 3 friends quit police forces because they didn't agree with the corruption within the police force, but they didn't feel like they could change anything, which I would chastise them about heavily, because if you want to make the change, you need to be in a position to do that. You quit, so that there's absolutely no solution now. So, but there's things that we can do. We can do better training, longer, more in-depth psychological profiling of the police officers. There's just tons of stuff, but you can't ignore the school to prison pipeline either, especially for inner cities, like in rural areas or states like Utah. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of an issue. Specifically when most of our crimes here in Utah are theft, but there's definitely serious issues that we need to address with policing in the United States.
Yeah, another thing that people may or may not know about policing in the United States. I mean, the vast majority of crimes that police investigate are not violent crimes. But a lot of people fixate on the violence that goes on here because it is outrageous. There is a lot of violence here. There's tons of gun violence, a ridiculous amount. However, again, it's a small sliver of the crimes that police investigate. Most of them are nonviolent crimes. And so, and most people who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes. So it's just, we come from a Puritan background, right? Where like, punishing people for their sins is like a thing. And it's kind of creeped into, I feel like, a lot of our laws and the way that we think about incarceration, right? There's 5 justifications for it. There's specific deterrence, right? You want to specifically incarcerate someone to deter that specific instance, like a serial killer or something, right? Then there's general deterrence, right? There's just a general behavior that you want to make sure that people are not doing. So that's why you lock someone up. Hopefully it'll deter other people. There's incapacitation, where like, this person's so bad that we can't have them living amongst the rest of society. So we have to incapacitate them. And that's why we lock them up. And then there's retribution, right? Like in retribution for what this person did, we got to lock them up. We got to punish them. And then there's rehabilitation, right? Which is that we're locking this person up to help, train them and mold them into a member of society who can actually contribute and do good out there. And if you look at our justice system, rehabilitation is virtually non-existent. That's not really what our system is trying to do. Our system is more designed to keep people in or keep people coming back. And it makes sense when, you think about the financial interest that people have in keeping that cycle going.
Well, there's a term called institutionalization. It's a real thing. But to speak to that for a moment, oh, good grief, I just forgot my point. I'm sorry. Shit.
Happens, brother. Happened to me earlier. We'll take questions or anything. Like if you have questions or stuff that we're asking, I love questions, so I would love to answer some.
Okay, so let me ask this question. Are you familiar with the Roland Fryer study?
Yes.
Okay, so what are your takes on it?
It goes back to what I was saying about statistics, right? I think that Roland Fryer is very clear about what you can conclude and what you can't conclude about it. And there's very little that he's able to conclude. So like, I mean, that's all I get from it. I don't think it really, it doesn't say much. You know what I mean? It doesn't really say much. It doesn't really investigate what I think are the major problems. It doesn't really offer any solutions. So I didn't find it that compelling. I think it's well done. I think the study itself, it was well done. There were no glaring errors. I think the math was done well, but it just is not useful. That's what I would say.
So what sort of things would you have expected to see in that study?
I just think that we don't need to study this. Like this has been these issues have been going on for decades. The problem is not that people are not studying it right or something. So I just for me, that's where I'm at. I think this has been studied into the ground. No new studies are gonna like reveal something that we don't already know. Like that's where I'm at on it. That's all. So it's not really about the study itself or anything like that. I just think that at this point we need to move beyond studying and we need to like focus on action, because we have actions, like I said, that we can take. And now we know that, so we need people to start fueling those actions.
I would only disagree in the sense that we could do studies.
You sound like a robot, Steve.
Yeah.
Hold on. All right, how about now? Better? Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes my computer switches my mic. I would only disagree with that in the sense that we could do studies where we can take certain police departments and institute certain changes and watch what those changes do and watch what the outcomes are produced. That would be a valuable use of time for a study, but I definitely kind of agree with Will here. Is like pointing the problem out isn't finding a solution. There's definitely a difference between finding a solution and just saying, hey, we have a problem.
those are two completely different problems.
I mean, I think what you're describing there is just straight up police reform, right? Like if you choose to implement a policy that's a change, like of course, if it's a new policy, you're going to investigate and reflect on whether it worked or not, right? And whether it served the interest of one. So yeah, I agree. That's what we need to do. And some localities are doing that. And again, they're doing it to good effect. They are actually improving their communities and their departments. However, are those reforms that work? Are they becoming popularized? Do they get implemented by other departments? And the reason why they don't is like, there's so many reasons actually. Like, I mean, a litany of them. I would say at the top is that a lot of these departments want to keep their isolation, their kind of insular inner workings, to themselves. They don't like outsiders coming in telling them what they need to change about their department. It's very much a thing culturally in departments. I think another one is a lot of these departments are not really accountable to anyone, like at all. And that's reflected in kind of a lot of the outcomes that happen when there's a problem. So without any kind of accountability, they're not really incentivized to make changes, especially if they're both individually and at a macro level profiting from doing things the way that they are, regardless of whether that's corrupt or, in defiance of their oath. It's just very complicated. I don't see how, and that's why people say the system itself has to be broken down, because again, just like Steve was saying earlier, the good officers get pushed out. They get worn down, right? It's a sacrifice to have to put yourself in that position where, you're relying on other people for your life and death, quite literally, people who you are also trying to bring down because of their corruption. I mean, I don't think many people can contemplate being in that situation really. And it's an impossible situation. So really we need to deal with it at a systemic level, at the level of policing itself. What do we want policing to be? We need to go back to the drawing board. What do we want it to be? What do we want them to do? What do they want to do? And I'll tell you what they don't want to do. They don't want to go to mental health calls and deal with people who are mentally ill. They don't want to do it. Like, they will tell you themselves they don't want to respond to these calls, So if that's the case, let's find another way. Let's use some of their budget to find another way, which I think most officers are also okay with. So we've just got to find a way to do it. We've just got to find a way to build the political will, right? That momentum that carries an idea from just an idea to actual legislation. And then we can see what powers push back on that. And that's how these, kind of enemies, if you will, reveal themselves.
There's also another significant component here too, Will, which is every year more and more laws are passed every single year. And these officers have to be mindful of this. So what you're doing is you are employing a police officer at, let's quite frankly just say it, really crappy wages, which is not beneficial to someone who says, hey, look, there's something going on here, right? I don't get paid enough to worry about those things. That's the excuse that's being heard, right? If you were to pay police officers more for doing less, you'd probably have more police officers and law enforcement agencies being like, yes, let's do more of that, right? Because the less they're in the line of harm, the more willing they are to change. That's an aspect that I would argue.
I guess the reason why I don't argue that is because, and I do think you're right to a certain extent. I'm just not sure how effective that would be in the context of policing. Because, yeah.
Put it this way: if you were to pay someone $100,000 a year to be a police officer, I don't know about you, but I would be far less likely to risk that money. I'm going to make much better decisions about how I am conducting myself.
I mean, the truth, Steve, is that some of those officers are making that much money just from committing crimes under the color of law. So, like,
sure, right.
Nah.
Yeah, but that's a really difficult statement to back up, even though I agree with you that it's definitely possible they're doing that. I mean, just going based off of factual information.
To back up, like, there are records. The issue is that, right, when police commit crimes, they are not blasted the way that civilian crime is blasted into the media. When police commit crimes, it is swept under the rug. It's hidden under the table. You may see an article here or there if it's an extreme case, But like the 11 officers in Ohio that I posted on Twitter today, right? Are people going to learn about that? Probably not. The vast majority of people, probably even in Ohio, will not learn about that. They will not learn what those officers did, how they were beating on people all the time, And you can watch video of what I'm talking about here, right? Like in that thing I posted, you can watch people in handcuffs being tased, being like, why are you tasing me? Like, I don't understand what's happening right now. What's happening is the state is using their influence on you. That's what's happening. That's what they do. They exert violence through these state actors. It happens all the time, and people are just unaware of it, right? They're walking around the country unaware of it. And so
I don't disagree with that, Will. I don't disagree with that at all. I'm sure it happens. What I'm saying is that it's difficult to verify how much of it is happening and where exactly that it's happening. So it's difficult for me to say, yeah, we should focus on something that we can hardly even see and are barely aware of. What I'm saying is make it not worth their time to break the law.
That is not a thing that works, right? Like, I mean, it's not
absolutely
like,
it does.
No, like people don't think, I mean, I don't know why you would think that, Steve. Because
if I'm making $60,000 a year right now, and you're telling me if I break the law, I'm going to lose my job and end up, because I don't have any other training, I'm going to work in a fast food joint for 30. I'm not going to break the law. I'm not going to risk my $60,000 that feeds my family, puts a roof over their heads. I'm not going to risk that. I think it's a, well, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah. So I think the problem with what you're proposing is that there is no penalty for breaking the law in the first place. So it doesn't matter if they're earning $2 or they're earning $100,000. There's not going to be a penalty, right? So your proposition would work if there's actually a penalty, right? So if there's a penalty in place,
I'm not arguing that.
Yeah,
I'm not arguing that.
No, so when you're saying they need to be paid more, I don't think paying them more is going to solve any of the issues. If at all, it's going to just make them worse. Because
it's not a singular fix, Charles. That's not what I'm arguing.
Okay.
I'm saying it's one of the solutions that we can have.
One of the solutions. Okay.
One of the solutions.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think it would definitely have to be paired with other solutions. But yeah, if it's one of
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well then, yeah. I mean, yeah, listen, I think paying people more in a lot of different contexts will improve things, right? Like, I mean, when people are in an economic deficit, they're easier to manipulate. So it's not a mistake that police officers make what they make either. Okay. Like, they're being controlled by this system just as much as they have violence exerted on them just as much as like the populace, and they're fearful of their own officers. When I ran that panel discussion, when I was talking to the two black captains and the one black lieutenant, of course we asked them about racism and how they thought about racism and policing. And, what they were saying is that, listen, we understand the fear that black people feel. We understand the fear that black people feel as civilians, because he's like, listen, as soon as we take our uniforms off, we are no different. We have that exact same fear. That's one thing they said. Then one of them spoke up and said, well, even if you have your uniform on, it doesn't necessarily make a difference. I was in full uniform. He was stopped by another police officer, a white officer, who made him get out of the car, who disarmed him, who, did all the, despite seeing him in full uniform, literally just to exert control, right? Just to feel that superiority and control over another person. We see that reflected in so many police interactions. So it's just like, I don't think that we can sleep on the nature of the problem. I think it's very important for us to kind of think about the nature of the problem. I think economics are really low on the percentage of what the problem is. So that's why I think it has to be multiple. If you're going to use an economic solution, it's got to be more than just paying more. Because a lot of these officers, again, are getting like tons of overtime. It's like built into the structure. Like, I feel like people don't get that either. Like, that's not like other jobs. Like, other jobs, like, And well, maybe some service jobs,
Oh.
right? You may like be like,
Yeah.
okay, like I'm counting this much for my salary and this much overtime that I'm going to get, right? So these
Right.
officers are like doing it at an extreme level. Like,
Well, so here's a solution. Here's a partial solution, I will say. You know, being a mechanic in shops that I've worked at before, if I made a mistake, I got back flagged for the time that I made off of it. Right? I get punished for when I make a mistake. I would not be opposed for instituting something like that in this case too. Is like if you are consistently getting reports that you're violating people's civil liberties, and you keep getting these $1,000 fines that you have to pay back, I'm sure that would, I mean, hurt people in their pockets is one of the best ways of controlling their behavior.
how about this? How about this? Add up all those fines plus all the money that the city has to pay out for these settlements for police brutality. The amount of money that we are paying to settle these cases is ridiculous. And people are also unaware of that. They don't understand that literally hundreds of millions of dollars have been paid out to people who have been unjustly injured or like detained or, you know, all kinds of things, you know, by the police. Like the guy I told you got lit on fire, Charles, you know, they tased this guy while he was handcuffed, sitting in a chair, and lit him on fire. Because
there was one where this police officer violated a dude's rectum with a toilet plunger and paraded it around the police station. I want to say it was a very big city too. I can't remember where it was though.
And like, what's important for other people to know too is like a lot of the things that happen when people are in custody are not recorded, right? You don't have your phone at that time. So having these phones out in the streets has helped a lot. But once you get into custody and you're being controlled, someone has to leak that footage. And most of what happens in terms of accountability within police stations and within prisons is because someone leaks something. And those people are typically, if they're ever found out, retaliated against. So that's the situation. It's really bad.
Yeah, I think part of the problem, I mean, just to be real about the issue, I mean, these people do put their lives on the line every day, and it's really hard to quantify the amount of money that you're supposed to pay them to do that. Plus, it does something else, which it creates kind of a camaraderie amongst the officers. A little bit more willing to let this cop go off of this little thing that he did. We'll just bury it because he puts his life on the line every day. And so I think there has to be a complete social structure change within police department communities to start saying it doesn't matter. It's not okay that you did this. Like, we are supposed to be the most lawful of the groups out there. We should not be breaking the law and just excusing it. Otherwise, we can't complain when criminals do it. Why should they be held accountable, but us not? Like, there's a hypocrisy that is baked into the system that no one's been able to bake back out. That's a massive problem.
Very similar to the way white supremacy operates. Okay, something that's been baked in the system is very difficult to kind of untether from it. You know, yeah. Any more questions, Charles? We got anybody else who wants to jump in here?
So the stream is open. If anyone wants to call in, Stanley, I'd appreciate if you can call in. So let's hear your voice. But
I have a question, but I've got to formulate it first. So give me a second.
Okay. So maybe I'll just go through the chats and see if we can get some questions, pull out some questions from there. I've been seeing.
Oh, I remembered what I was going to say.
So
Will was commenting on the number of people in prison for nonviolent offenses. And this is something that's been going around long before Joe Rogan made a comment about it. But you've got people like the basketball player, I can't remember her name, and all of the hoopla about, oh, it's not that big of a deal. She shouldn't have been put in prison for weed. It's like
Brittany Griner.
Brittany Griner, yeah, thank you. No, she broke a law of another country. Like, that's a legitimate problem. Whether we agree with that law or not, it's not our place to say. But what is a problem is that the federal government is trying to get her released while there's still millions and millions and millions of people in prison right now for selling a bag of weed. Like, that's a fundamental hypocrisy that we need to actually like discuss. But also, it's like, being a libertarian myself, it's like, I don't agree with putting someone behind bars for a personal choice that doesn't harm anybody else other than myself. Like that is such a ridiculous idea to me that I've never been able to support that perspective. So there's the problem that I think we didn't address in that conversation specifically is, where does justice to the people who have been harmed come from, right? So you've got tax evasion. Well, you've hurt the government at that point, even though I disagree with taxing. But let's say you've Bernie Madoff, great example. He conned dozens of people out of millions of dollars, right? It's a nonviolent crime, but he still needs to be held accountable for his crime, right? So what do you think the cutoff should be for prison time? And do you think we should start taking another look at minimum statutes of what do they call it? Minimum sentencing laws.
Okay. The first question. The first question was, can you repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just curious as what do we do? How do we delineate between victimless crimes that aren't violent but do have a harmed party? You get what I'm saying? So
yeah. So I mean, we already do that, right? Like, we already have all the laws on the books. Like, it goes back to a little bit of what I was saying before, which is that the problem isn't like what the laws are; it's how they are executed. It's like how they are enforced. And so, unfortunately, I don't even know if there's like a true legislative fix. Even if we were to abolish qualified immunity, honestly, I can see like a legal pathway for them to get around that. So like, I just have seen too much in the law to rely on that. But also, we already have a legal structure, right, that does deal with that, except for what you said, the minimum sentences issue. The sentencing guidelines have been in dispute for so long, like they've gone back and forth through many iterations of policy changes. There's no perfect answer, right? Like, there's no perfect answer. We have all these balancing tests depending upon what happens in different situations. We've got the difference between misdemeanors and felonies, right? We've got DA discretion, right? Prosecutorial discretion, where they can choose to change the charges depending upon certain aggravating factors, whether that's into increasing the amount of time or decreasing the amount of time they might get. So there are a lot of like different ways to deal with that. The problem is who the DA is, what their policy is. Like, I spoke to a lawyer on my show, a black lawyer. He first was a criminal defense attorney, and then he was a prosecutor after that, because he decided he could make more of an impact as a prosecutor after seeing his powerlessness as a defense attorney. But then he found himself just as powerless as an assistant district attorney, because he saw that his district attorney would take the same fact pattern, look at who the person was, and then make a decision about what to do with them. So very similar to the story I told earlier about the police officer asking me about the race of the people who were involved in trying to kill each other before they responded. He experienced that as a prosecutor when they were deciding what charges to press. Same fact pattern, but different decision. And there was literally nothing different. He was just like, what? This is a white woman, this is a black man. And like, you're just going to throw this person in jail, and this person, you're going to let them go. All right.
Yeah. Sentencing disparities by gender is a big deal too. But something that concerns me as well, and this is not on the topic of law enforcement, but it is on the topic, so to speak, is the way that we treat ex-convicts and the reformation process and the rehabilitation process too. Is, we set these people into jail. They do 6 years, they have a felony on their record, but now, like in states like mine, we have the good landlord ordinance, which is if you don't have felons or criminals renting from you, you get a benefit from the state. I fundamentally disagree with this problem. Because my second wife was a felon, and I couldn't put her on any of the documentation that she was living somewhere. Now, she was lucky and had a husband that was providing for her, but there's tons of people out there that come out of the prison system, and this is talking about that prison pipeline, right? You can't get a job in some places if you're a felon. You can't rent an apartment if you're a felon. And so what are these people supposed to do? A lot of the times there's been people who have committed a crime just so they could go back and have a place to sleep and food to eat. It's like this is a very sad joke that every American knows, and it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, well said, Steve. I did have a convicted felon on my program as well to talk about his experience, and it is incredibly frustrating. You know, he spent years beating the pavement trying to find a job, find someone who would hire a convicted felon, because you have to disclose it by law. Okay. If you don't disclose it, you can be put back in prison. So like, you know, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I have to disclose, but I know that someone likely won't hire me if I write down that I was convicted of a felony, even though I've done my time, right? So it's the punishment after the punishment, and that's by design.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole point is that you have to pay your debt to society, but the debt keeps being incurred even after you've paid your debt to society, which is what prison is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's more like a brand, a conviction.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's really shitty, if you ask me. But are you sure that it's against the law to not mark down whether you're a felon or not?
It definitely is, yeah.
All right.
You must disclose. Sorry, I heard you say that earlier. So sorry. You have to disclose it, yeah, if you're applying for a job. Yeah.
Every job? Because I think here in Utah, you're not legally required to list whether you're a felon or not. Yeah.
I've never
heard
that before. That's
the only time you are is if the felony has any relation to what you're doing. So if you're a convicted pedophile, you can't go working in a school, right? So in those cases, you know, they're gonna find out anyways because they're gonna do a background check. But you get what I'm saying? It's like if you're convicted of tax fraud, you shouldn't be working for H&R Block. So I want to say there's a law in the books in Utah that doesn't require it, but I'm not entirely 100% sure.
Right, so
but I've had dozens of friends who were just like, I just didn't put it on my application because it doesn't even pertain to what I do. I talk on the phone, but I was convicted of drugs. So why should that be an issue? So
this is from the Utah government site. It says the following types of criminal incidents usually must be reported: any misdemeanor in any jurisdiction in the last 10 years, any felony in any jurisdiction, any active or pending criminal action. That's typical, but that's interesting if you don't have to disclose that. The reason the law got that to that point, right, was because so many people didn't like finding out on the back end, right, that they had hired someone who had a criminal conviction. And unfortunately, some of those concerns were valid, right? Like, because a lot of people with a lot of mental health problems, again, you know, or who develop them in prison or who become more violent because of how they had to survive in prison. Now they're coming out, they're trying to, like, they're supposed to just go back and come into civilian life the same way that, like, military members are expected to just come back from war and just, like, integrate themselves into civilian life. Like, and it's like
everything's okay.
Yeah, it's not reasonable. It's not, we should have a smoother transition for people who get out of prison to be able to integrate themselves into society. And we just don't have that. And it's not a priority for this country because, again, that conviction's like a brand. And when people see the brand, what they think is you deserve that. And like, that is something that the country holds on to, like with desperation. I don't know why, you know, it's more dehumanization. You know, it's more dehumanization, right. Just another way to make sure that you are not looked at as like a human. And it's just very frustrating because there are convicted felons who are just beautiful humans, you guys, who are confined to an invisible box. And they did their time, and it's not fair and it's unjust. And even though that person may have hurt somebody else, right? Or maybe they, injured somebody or even killed someone, it's still unjust. And it's hard for people to accept that reality because we're such a punishment country. We're such a, yeah, let's lock that person up, lock her up, the whole country chanting it or something. But ultimately, locking people up doesn't help them. Okay. It may keep us safe from someone. I mean, it does do that, right? But like beyond that, what does it do? What does it do for us as a society, especially if we're only going to use them up for whatever money they can make us and then put them back out there, which happens also. Like, and then people are out there 2 days, they kill somebody else, because they were just basically tortured for all these years and then released into the wild, like, what do we expect? At some point, we got to start using logic to dictate what we do with these policy questions. And we're just simply not doing that. It's mostly about enriching people and continuing to inflame people's fears and their inclination to dehumanize to just keep the business running,
Yeah. What do you think about sentencing disparities? How can we fix that problem? Because there's sentencing disparities between gender and race and class.
Yeah.
Like, how do we, like, this is where I think mandatory sentencing is applicable, but at the same time, I'm heavily against mandatory sentencing. So I'm kind of torn on this topic.
Sorry, Anna, to answer your question, would I implement mass restorative justice? Not immediately. I would transition to that, but I think it's possible to do that.
The catch to that is the victim has to agree to the restorative process.
Yeah, but that's true in all restorative systems, that has to be a part of it, I believe. But Steve, I'm sorry, can you ask me again? I got sidetracked.
Sentencing disparities.
Oh, right, sentencing disparities. Okay, so no. It's the short answer. Do I think that we can do something about it? No. And the reason why is because I think if you look closer, a lot of the disparities you'll see are based on like judges, individual judges, judiciary discretion, or laws that are on the books about minimum sentences that have to be given under whatever circumstances. There's also, believe it or not, an inclination for a lot of judges to misinterpret the sentencing guidelines to give higher sentences in certain cases and whatnot. And there's no check on that unless somebody appeals.
Well, they'll just tag on more crimes to the problem anyways.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you could do to justify like mistakes you make in the law as well. Like, and a lot of them come down on people in negative ways. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah. Because there's sentencing disparities between genders, which is men tend to get 63% longer sentences than women do for the same crimes.
Mm-hmm.
There's disparities between black and white, which is, oh God, I forgot what it was. It was like on average, like 10 years longer sentencing for, it was a lot of, man, I wish I could remember the number.
I think that's accurate. I know what you're referencing, and I believe
it's like 10 years longer for the same crime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was like a ridiculous amount. And it's like, why that's an aspect of the process that I'm kind of curious about, because why can't we institute a process where we can have a judiciary oversight system that says, is this case is this person over sentenced due to the severity of their crime?
Well, they're supposed to actually look at that, right? It's already part of the process. Again, it's just not being activated. So like that's the issue, is like we have to stop believing that like if we only use the structures that are in place the right way, that things would change, because that's not really like a realistic interpretation of what can happen. Like, so like, let me give you an example. We have to be careful about the data we're even talking about, because disparities between men and women, right? So like, if you think you're saying for the same crimes, right? But like, oftentimes the fact patterns between the same crimes that men and women commit are drastically different. And so even though the charge itself is the same, the fact patterns are radically different. And sometimes that heavily influences the sentencing. And I think for women, that happens a lot more. Of course, women are also looked at as more like, frail and, like not prison suited or like this and that, like stuff like that. So that plays into it as well. But I think a lot of it does. Yeah. Oh, wait, you're on.
Here's the interesting thing about that. Female judges tend to sentence females harsher punishments.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And male judges tend to not.
Yeah, it makes
It's
sense.
like-
Yeah, because a woman, right? I mean, if a woman's looking at another woman, especially a judge, right? You know, think about what all that judge went through law school. You know, like got elected to a judiciary. You know, she went through the ringer, she went through patriarchy and all that, and she came out on top. But you're here, like in front of her, a woman as a criminal. She's going to treat you just like anyone else, right? I had to do it, you couldn't do it. Like, you know, it's that kind of thing. So,
And besides, she knows how women are, so the woman might be able to fool the male judge, but she knows, like, I know what you're capable of. I'm a woman as well, so
exactly, yeah, she's not, no feminine wiles are going to work on her. So, unless she's a lesbian, it might work then. But, but
oh
yeah,
man, there was another one.
The other thing I was going to say was, you know, with the racial disparities in sentencing, right? Like, I think that when you evaluate individual cases of that, what you'll see is a lot of times, again, judicial discretion, the judge saying, oh, well, he had his whole life ahead of him, right? Like, I don't want to put this, he didn't want to brand him, right? He specifically didn't want to put the brand on him because he was like, I know what that means. And we can't have this young white man experiencing that, you know, like if we don't put this brand on him, then what can he accomplish, right? That potential, that imaginary potential that the judge is choosing to protect, right? We see it time and time again, but you don't hear that same kind of conversation about Black people generally, you know, because we're not looked at as having any potential in this country by a lot of people, you know? So yeah, there's that.
There was that, what was his name? Brock something, who
Turner,
was
yeah.
found was raping someone, and they tried to get him off easy. And it's like, well, I didn't want to brand this young man for the rest of his life. It's like, yeah, but he had no problem, you know, branding the girl that he was raping as a victim for the rest of her life and having to deal with her problems.
Well, isn't it interesting, Steve, how in that specific situation, right, the justification for incarcerating him would have been all the ones that I mentioned, right? Like retribution, right? Getting punishment for what he did. General deterrence. You definitely want to generally deter people from raking unconscious girls behind dumpsters. You know, specific deterrence as well. And incapacitation to protect other girls who he might, you know, try and do this again. You don't know. But they chose rehabilitation in that situation, right? They chose to protect his future over any of those other justifications. And really, it's got to be about his race, right? You know, like, I mean, I think
it's more about his money and his class in that particular circumstance. But
you really think
I don't say that race wasn't an issue.
If you think he was a rich Black boy, Steve, you really believe that conversation would have happened between him and the judge?
I'm not going to make the assumption. I'm just saying
he
was rich.
But you believe it's possible?
It's possible, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I think
I'm not devoid of reality.
I think it's virtually impossible, like 99.9% that would never occur. So I just find it, you know, I don't have to speak in absolutes, but I also don't like bringing up the 0.01% just because it exists, you know. So that's all I'll say about that. There's some questions here. Should we like answer them or?
Yeah, sure. If you see any question that you find interesting, you can just go ahead and answer them. Maybe in the next 10 minutes, then we can end the stream.
For example, if a woman rapes a boy, have her pay the boy money for the next 20 years instead of going to jail. That's funny. When I was in law school, we had to do a project about child pornography. It was awful. All of us had to write research and write about what would be the best retribution for someone who's a victim of child pornography. So we had to learn how it all works, you know, like how the images get spread and all over the place and the videos and whatnot, and the impact it has on the victims. It was like the worst summer ever. But my paper was about establishing a fund for these people that they would have to pay into. And, you know, basically you dole out a certain percentage. And then I had this calculation that I did based on, you know, how widespread or how many years the material had been out there or whatever. And then a time limit for how long it would last. But Yeah, I agree that there should be some financial compensation because those sexual crimes, whether it's pornography or whether it's rape or whether it's assault, whatever it is, like they change you as a person, as someone who has experienced it myself. They change you forever. Like a lot of people who don't have never experienced it, I don't think it's possible to understand actually, because something like literally inside you changes from that moment forward, and you can like quite literally feel it forever. So I don't think a lot of people get that. So yeah, I do agree that should pay into it if those crimes are committed.
That's one point that we haven't covered yet, is where do the police do things right? And that's one of them. Like there's, I see a lot of the complaints, all these, these cops are doing these bad things, but it's like, we don't pay attention to the good things that they do either, which police officers, if they work in SVU departments, which one of my friends did, they have a 5-year lifespan. They can't do it for more than 5 years. And most of the time they're taking breaks consistently throughout that time period, because it's brutal. It's taxing on the mind and on the soul. But these people commit themselves to doing this for a number of years to solve cold files, kidnapping files, sexual trafficking, in some places prostitution. Those are the things that we don't talk about that cops do really, really well with.
Yeah, I mean, listen, cops do good work all the time, and I don't want my comments to be perceived as like, not giving those cops their flowers or, what they deserve. Because yes, just like with any job, right, there's people doing an exemplary job. And I definitely applaud those people and award them. Unfortunately, they are still part of an institution that's doing some of the worst things that are happening to people in our country.
This conversation is about accountability, really.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for those officers who are good, right? Because like, there's no way the vast majority of those officers who are doing a good job are enjoying their job because they have to work with these other people, and so it's very difficult. Some of them can find an alcove, right, where they can just do good and they can focus on what they're doing, or they get enough power to be able to change things a little bit in the department and keep enough control over the reins to where, they're promoting good work. And that's great. But it's the same kind of feeling that I feel as an instructor in higher education. Higher education is breaking at the seams as an institution, and it's purposeful that people are trying to break it. It's very similar that people are trying to perpetuate an incarceration system is what's happening in education, and I'm in that, right? So what did I do? I did exactly, Steve, what you were saying before. I'm in the system. Well, I got to fix it, right? So I tried, right? I tried to organize my faculty at my institution. I became elected president of a statewide organization, the largest one, representing the people who I wanted to help. And ultimately, what did I run into? A power that doesn't want to yield and do what's best for the student and the faculty. They have business, financial interests that they are promoting. Now, the reason that I was able to gain a little bit of movement and success is because I was able to figure all that out and analyze what their financial interest was and prove to them that their own policies will not yield the result that they're aiming for. But it's only because I was able to see it from all those different perspectives and understand what they wanted. But they are totally blind to what the purpose of a school is. I think it's very similar in policing. Like, we need to redefine what the purpose of police are. Okay. We don't need all these police officers to clamp down on us and be stalking us and chasing after us all the time. Honestly, we don't need it. And like, we need to accept that as a country. And I think many people are almost there, are either there or almost there, realizing we don't need all this. This is no longer a necessity. We're not living in a world that requires it. And so we need to think about how to turn police into change-making agents in their community in ways that doesn't involve violence. I think it's not that hard, to be honest. I think it would be pretty easy. It's just that we are not trying to do that. Nobody's trying to do that, really. And so, yeah, I think for a radical change like that to occur in a country like ours, it's going to take a lot more violence. That's really unfortunate, but I think it's going to take a lot more lives being lost at the hands of law enforcement until people find it unacceptable enough to do something about it. I think that's true about a lot of our biggest problems here.
Well, you had cases like Tony Timpa that didn't get any recognition whatsoever, but instead people use that as a bullet point in a racial discussion. But it's like, I don't think people understand the point. The point is that police are brutalizing and killing people because they have the power to do so. That's the problem that we have here.
That's exactly
and
right.
Right. And just because it affects one group more than the other doesn't mean that the other group isn't worthy of our attention. That seems to escape most of these kind of conversations that I'm glad that we're addressing here.
Yeah, man. I mean, there was just a white man who was having a mental health crisis, right? Where the officers put him in a freezer and he froze to death. And then they dragged his frozen...
Wait. In a freezer? How?
Yeah. As a punishment. Listen, corrections officers and officers who are holding people, they kill people. Like, I'm not saying that it happens regularly and all the time or anything like that, but it happens way too frequently.
There was even a worse one, Charles.
They wanted him to cool off.
They wanted him to cool off. Yeah. Here's the worst one. They put a guy in the back of a van, transporting him, basically cooked him alive. Didn't check on him, didn't give him water, didn't help cool him down. They literally just drove.
They have an IQ of like 2, like is their IQ 2, like 2.
Well, you can see their reaction after they find out these people are dead. It's not like, oh my God, I killed someone.
Oh, shucks.
Right. It's just like, well, let's get them in the car. Let's, stage the scene. I mean, they don't even have to communicate about it. It's that commonplace that they don't even have to like coordinate. Like I've seen so many brutal videos. I saw a video of 5 cops tasing. They were outside, maybe like half a mile outside of a concert venue, and there was a straggler concert goer, and they just happened to prey on this kid. They tased him to death over like a long period of time, like 20 minutes. They're tasing him over and over again, yelling the whole time, stop resisting, don't move, stop resisting, give us your hands, this and that, right? And you can see that in the Ohio video, right, that I showed. They're yelling at people to stop resisting who are handcuffed, who they're literally tasing. Like, it's just something they do to create the illusion that they're doing the right thing for themselves, for the cameras, right? And that's enough. That's all they have to do. All they have to do is play pretend, and they know that, and it's common practice.
Well, look at
yeah. Go ahead.
Well, look at what it was during one of the BLM marches, and there was like some old dude. I mean, this dude was old as dirt, and he was standing up against the police, and the police just like boom, bowled him over. He hit his head. There's blood everywhere. There was another story somewhere. I think it was even.
Wait, before you go to the next one, and the rest of that story is an officer tried to help him, and
they pulled him off of him and told him leave him alone. Like, that's jacked up. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. There was another story, I think it was here in Utah, where an 80-year-old woman was tased almost to death. Like, she suffered serious head injuries. I think she broke a hip, all because she didn't like what was going on, and the cops didn't want to deal with her.
Yeah, there's another one where another back of the van story. They didn't secure this guy. They put him in cuffs in the back of the van. Then they rapidly brake. And he hit his head in the front of the van and broke his neck. He could no longer walk. And then after I heard that story, I found out there's an actual name for cops that the cops have for doing that, because that's how common it is. There's like a name for it. So like, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I've heard a lot today. I'm still trying to process how much I've heard. I mean, police in Nigeria, they are terrible, but I think this is like I don't think you would get something like this in my country, right? They're bad cops, right? They are cops who would kill you over some change because you don't want to bribe them or something, But most of my interactions with police have been very, very cordial because, first of all, I know I'm calm. I know my rights, and I don't try to aggravate them, right? At times, I even joke with them, when you see a police officer in my country, it's always common for those police officers on the road for them to ask you for money, like, "Oh, what do you have for us? Give us some money." So at times, I preemptively do that. When I get close to them, I ask them, like, "Ah, you're a government worker. The government has given you the money. So where's my share?" They just laugh and they say, "Go," right? Another way they use to victimize people is when your papers are not complete. So you have to. My papers are always complete. They're always on point. So you don't have anything to hold me on. So if you want to check, take your time to check, and when you're done, I take my stuff and I'll leave, right? So just hearing these things is sort of crazy. It's crazy to hear these things, right? And I thought that our police were bad here. They're bad police in certain parts of the country. There are police who just they specialize on just killing innocent people and framing them for crimes. Just kill innocent people and frame them. Oh, that this was a criminal, or you found something on them. But in terms of arresting people, you don't get a situation where people are being beaten to arrest them, right? Or people are they're already in custody and they're still being attacked. No, you won't get that here. Most of the times, just the presence of the police itself is enough to make the people just comply, right? If the policeman tells you get in, you get in. I've seen a couple of times when they're arresting people, they don't put them in cuffs. They just get them into the police van and they drive them away. They don't even have to put them in cuffs. That's how compliant the people are generally around the police. So I look, ah, man, this is a lot. But anyhow,
Charles,
Steve, go ahead. Go ahead.
the most corrupt policing agency or law enforcement agency. All right, well, let me rephrase that. The country with the worst police corruption by far is Mexico. That is a nightmare down there, and the people know it. Because the cartels are so strong and so rich that most of the police officers' incomes are stipend from cartels. It's a serious problem, very serious problem. As a matter of fact, a lot of people go missing from police custody in Mexico for that exact reason. They will literally walk these people out and hand them over to the cartels. So I think that to a large extent, policing has its core issue is unmitigated, unbalanced power to do as one pleases with very little consequence. That's always been the fundamental problem with policing in any country. It's just policing in general. This is a problem.
Yeah, I agree
Wow.
with that.
So, thank you very much, William, for joining us. This was a very interesting conversation. Like the energy of the stream, and it was very, very engaging. The chat was lighting up, and I'd really love to have you back. I think there are so many things that you can talk about. You can talk about, schooling. I'm really, really interested in the education angle. I'm also interested in you mentioned something about white supremacy, systemic racism. Let me explore those things with you, those thoughts with you, in future conversations, and I hope you'll be obliged to come back to have these conversations with us. Steve, as usual, thank you very much for lending your voice to this conversation. So this would be a good place to end this conversation. But just before we go, just your final thoughts, Steve, and then William. Then we're done for the stream.
I'll let your guest go first. I'm always here.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you, Charles and Steve, for the great conversation. Thanks, Charles, for inviting me, and thanks to the chat and everyone for listening in. If anybody's interested in checking out my conversations on race, that's typically what I talk about. You can go to my website, www.thecontrabandwagon.com, and anyone can appear. Okay, just submit an application, and I'll get back to you via email. We'll have a 30-minute pre-interview Zoom conversation where you can ask me any questions, and then we can develop a list of bullet points that we want to hit and schedule a date and time for your live appearance. Okay, so
I've been through the process.
Yeah. And I just want to say on policing that I have nothing against people who choose to go into policing professions. I've taught many students who are now police officers or who are trying to become police officers. I have one right now who's training to become a police officer. Listen, I have nothing against these people. What I have something against is the corruption that's inherent in a system of policing and incarceration that we have here. And unfortunately, those people are part of that system. So there's no getting around that. There's no getting away from it. People's feelings are going to get hurt. People are going to feel offended. But ultimately, when you step foot and you decide to stay in a system that's corrupt, you are going to be associated with that corruption. That's why I'm leaving education as well, because now I feel the education system has turned too far into a corrupt enterprise at this point, which I never anticipated would ever get to that point. But now that it has, I have to step away. So I want to encourage everyone to stand up for justice, okay, regardless of the context. And if you find yourself being unable to sacrifice to stand up for justice, then that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person, but just remember that all decisions have consequences. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. So, Steve.
Yeah. A lot of my focus when I talk about stuff is, I'm always worried about where is the power being used and how is it being used and how is it being mitigated. Power is a fickle thing, and it's also a very tricky thing to find. It's not like power is written down in books, right? We can describe power, but it's very difficult to create a formula to try and figure out where it is and how it exists in any given context. So I think for me, it's a matter of being diligent and vigilant and trying to figure out ways that power is being abused in situations and speaking up against it. I think that's a lot of what we do here on Critical African Thinkers is we try to figure out what's going on, try and maybe even find solutions for it. But, we don't shy away from difficult conversations because those are the best ones to have, because those are the ones that are going to solve problems. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. And Charles, as usual, thanks for having me. And Will, it's good to see you again, man.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I'm just trying to get okay, so Will, you already so I was trying to get your YouTube.
Yeah, I put all my links in our private chat. I've got my YouTube channel. I don't update my YouTube guys regularly because I just don't have time. But there are some videos there. Please, in particular, pay attention to Contraband of Race War that explains why I chose the name Contraband and a little bit about my own personal evolution of race consciousness. And then I linked my Twitter and my website and my live stream where I do my live conversations on race as well. So hope to see people follow me on everything. And thanks for the opportunity again.
Yeah.
Steve, as always, good to see you, brother. Hope to see you at another racism discussion groups happening at the end of the month. All right.
Absolutely, man.
All right. Thank you very much, guys, for this conversation. So my final thoughts. I think that police is very, 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 very important for any society. Like I always say, you don't want to live in a state where there is no police, because in my country, I know there's been a couple of times where the police have pulled out for 2020. There was this incident of the NSARS where police brutality was being protested against, and there were some killings of some youths who were protesting. So for a while, the police were off the streets, and I personally know what happened when the police pulled out of the streets, how criminal elements took over the streets, and it was unsafe. I felt unsafe, right? So we want the police to be around. However, that doesn't mean that they will not be held to account, right? Their job is a difficult job. I understand it's a difficult job. I understand it's a dangerous job, but it's their job anyway, and they have to do it, and they have to be held to the highest standards, right? So we cannot say because their job is a difficult job, then we let them get away with certain things. The police have to do their job not perfectly, but they have to do their jobs. it's their job. If it's their job to protect lives and property, then they should do that, or at least don't commit crimes, right? And when they are found wanting, when they commit certain crimes, I think the punishment should be harsher for them, because they know they are supposed to be law enforcement officers. So why are they breaking the law? They should be very, very, very conscious of that. And that accountability must be there. There must be the political will to see it through, to make sure that the police officers, they are accountable. And if they do that, then everything would improve. But if we keep having a situation where the police are basically mini gods, where they go on an ego trip, where they keep asking you, "Do you know who I am?" For example, in my country, when they go on such ego trips, when they think they can do anything and get away with it, this is what you're going to find. It's human nature. People will take advantage of any situation, of any power they have, if that power is unchecked, right? So even the nicest of persons, when you give them unlimited power, they're going to abuse it. So systems and checks and balances need to be in place to make sure that the police do not abuse their power. So, guys, thank you very much for this stream. That will be all for today, and I will catch you guys in another live stream. So it's bye for now. So let me just put William's other links up in the chat before I end the stream. But it's bye for now. Thank you guys.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Take
calling.
care. So long, everyone.